They just dumped 256 tons of toxic waste on my town, so it pissed me off.
You've negotiated hundreds of millions of dollars for the benefit of the environment.
It wasn't for me. I played poker with the refinery and had a good time doing that. Do you want to run your refinery or do you want to spend time in court? He said, well, nobody could force us to do this because we haven't violated anything, and you're asking us to spend $10 million we don't have to spend, so no.
Who are you?
I'm a devout hedonist, and I'm a spoiled kid. I always done what I felt like doing.
How did you get pulled into a lot of these things?
You think I'm not going to respond? So he turns to me and says, well, what is a good neighbor agreement? And I said, there isn't any formal definition of a good neighbor agreement, but it's a common sense thing. It was wintertime in the wind direction. It would have killed 1,500 we were predicting. I admit I conspired to obstruct their project. That's a civil conspiracy. They had to redo the model, and it killed their project. My suit won $50,000 a piece. That's bad karma money. You don't touch bad karma money. I'm having too much fun with all of this.
Welcome to today's episode of Getting to Know You, where I interview unique guests with unique perspectives. I'm your host, Cameron Edward Benton, and on today's episode, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Jay Gunkelman. Jay is a pioneer in EEG and neurofeedback, one of the most experienced EEG technologists in the world with over 50 years of experience and has read well over 500,000 EEGs. His work has contributed to a deeper understanding of brain function, mental health, and the use of neurofeedback for treating conditions like ADHD, PTSD, and various neurological disorders. He's also an environmental advocate who has negotiated hundreds of millions of dollars for environmental causes. He's a self-proclaimed devout hedonist and a lifelong seeker of truth. In this episode, Jay shares legendary stories of environmental advocacy where even when the deck is stacked against him, he takes big business on with nothing but wit, grit, and a well-timed bluff. One thing that really stood out to me in this episode was just how alive Jay is. After 75 years old, Jay is still full of zeal for everyday life. He's even been without a pituitary gland for probably over half of his life at this point. And it hasn't been an easy journey, but it has been one that he has lived absolutely fully. He's somebody who, through his lens of philosophical Daoism and being a self-proclaimed devout hedonist, truly follows his bliss. And at the same time, he has done so much positive and good for this world, which makes you wonder that perhaps it is by following your bliss that allows you to do the most good that you can for others. So without further ado, here is the one and only Jay Gunkelman. Jay, like one of the things that I think you show so much of is you've done again so much in the world. You've gallivanted seemingly across all the United States. You've traveled different places. You've done so much work in EEG and taught and learned and like grown so much. And you and I were talking off camera a little bit about like one of the things that most people maybe don't know about you as well is your avocation with the environment. And one of the things you've done there is you've negotiated hundreds of millions of dollars for the benefit of the environment.
It wasn't for me.
Well, what is it? I guess what is it that drives you to that, and like how did you even get involved in that?
Well, it actually goes back to when I was maybe 16 years old or so, back in North Dakota.
Mm.
The senator in North Dakota, Senator Burdick, was on the Appropriations Committee, and he wanted a big project that would bring a lot of jobs to the state. So they were going to divert water from a salt basin through the state to the Red River, and then it'd go up to Canada. Well, that was a make-work project. There was no reason to do it really, but it really had a lot of billions in it, So they were wanting to do it, and the environmental folks and the farmers who were going to cut a big ditch carrying water through their land, they weren't all that for it. It's salt water. It's not going to be any good for you. You can't irrigate with it. And Canada didn't want the water. The farmers, well, there's nobody more direct than a farmer. If you pull up on their land and they don't want you there, they will shoot. And the people pulling up to the job site in their trucks, getting out there's a gigantic electrical grid dredge that's going to scoop up 3 truckloads full of dirt and dump them in a truck and get it hauled out. So they're going to dig this diversion. Well, when a 30-06 pings the bucket in the morning, when you get out of your truck, you get back in your truck and you leave. So they couldn't get workers to stay at a site. Finally, they had helicopters and people all over, and that you couldn't shut down a job site that way. Well, it's an electrical. It's got a line that goes a long way back. All you got to do is pull down one of the poles. So they were shutting down the job site by hook or by crook, and the farmers were getting it done. Finally, they were monitoring everything, and they were actually making progress on this digging the ditch. The Audubon Society was in court trying to stop them because of some bird that was going to be impacted by it. But Canada didn't want the salt water. And we worked with Canada, and Canada basically told the U.S. government, well, we don't want your salt water. And the U.S. government said, well, you're downhill. I don't care what you want. You're going to get this water. You're downhill. And they said, well, thanks very much, but I can show you how much water we can resist. And they dammed the river, flooded 3 counties of North Dakota. And the government was begging them to undam the river, that they would negotiate with them, undam the river. Finally, the Audubon Society's litigation stopped the project, but Canada was ready to not accept salt water from the U.S.
Wow!
But that was when I was a kid, and I saw the high level poker game of playing with big industries and government. And if you're working in environmental, you're going to be playing poker with the big boys, and they play hardball. I look at computer modeling, and the project that was being proposed for North Richmond here in the Bay Area, which at the time was a poor Black community. Now it's switched over. A lot of Asians. It's still extremely poor. But if you're that poor, you're looking for your next step. You're not looking at the horizon as to what's coming. So the developer had proposed this garbage burning plant. Great. Garbage burning. They're going to be hauling garbage through your neighborhood. They're going to be burning it. The smoke is going to be toxic as shit, but their computer modeling is showing us that it's actually pretty good. And I'm thinking, how does a computer model suddenly show shit to not be shit? I mean, shit goes up, shit comes down, so somewhere in the computer model, it's hiding it. So I looked. It's a reflection coefficient or a buoyancy coefficient. And you could specify the particle size that would float. And the smaller the particle, the more likely it is to adsorb toxic to it. 1 micron particles have 99% of all the toxic heavy metals adsorbed to the outside of that particle. So if you float stuff from 2 microns on down, the environmental people, regulators, monitor all the way down to 2.5 microns. But 2 is below where they're looking. So you can take away all that stuff, and 99% of all the toxic shit that went up won't ever come down. And your model, the deposition model, shows what comes down and what's going to impact people. Well, if shit goes up and doesn't come down, you don't show much impact. But if you show up at a regulatory hearing and you stick your hand up and you say, they have a reflection coefficient of 2 microns, and I don't think 2 micron particles float. And unless you can show me a scientific paper where 2 microns is floating, it sinks like a freaking bowling ball. So come on, 0.2 microns floats with, just Brownian motion, floats it like a gas. But 2 microns comes down hard, and it has 99% of all the toxicity in it. So they're hiding in their model 99% of all their toxic exposure to all the neighborhoods around the plant.
Wow.
So redo the modeling, and then I'll accept your health consequence, data. But until you redo this model telling me where all this toxic shit's going, shit that went up has to come down. And right now it's not coming down. And you got to agree, if something goes up, it does come down. And they had to redo the model, and it killed their project.
Yeah.
So they sued me and 499 unnamed co-defendants for conspiracy to obstruct their project. I admit I conspired to obstruct their project. That's a civil conspiracy. There's no civil conspiracy law. It was a SLAP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. They were trying to get their permit back from PG&E, which they missed a deadline. If you didn't build it by a certain date, you lose your contract. Well, they couldn't build it in time. So they wanted to get an extended time for force majeure, which is a standard contract clause. What the hell's force majeure? Oh, it's an act of God. Well, and what force majeure was it that was you couldn't imagine and couldn't foresee that was going to stop your project? Oh, public opposition? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but that doesn't quite get up to the level of godly intervention. It's just a bunch of mucks like me, So they were trying to go back and get their contract extension in front of PG&E without public opposition. So 499 unnamed co-defendants would stay the shut up. And instead of shutting up, we decided we needed to sue them for suing me. So I contacted my lawyer, who looked at it as a good thing to do, and he took it on as a litigation. And he said, I'll have them served. And I said, no, I will serve the papers. That's half the fun. So I went to their sanitary district meeting, the board of the sanitary district, with a stack of service papers, serving them for the litigation. And I said, you guys, sued me and 499 unnamed co-defendants for stopping your garbage plant. I conspired against you. I admit I conspired against you, but it was a civil conspiracy. Your litigation against me was just a SLAP suit. It's illegal to do that. You took public money and gave it to a private individual, a lawyer, for a frivolous purpose. You breached your fiduciary responsibility to the district. So I'm suing you personally, 5 directors personally, for wasting your district's money. They didn't have D&O insurance. So all of them were liable.
What is D&O insurance? Director
and officer insurance. As a corporation, you could do something deliberately that is illegal and still be covered by your insurance company. But it's not cheap. That insurance is really costly. It'll double your liability insurance at least. And if you ever use it, then it goes way high. So they basically had their suit thrown out of court. In the interrogatories and depositions, we found out that the 499 unnamed co-defendants included the board of supervisors for the county, the newspaper. I mean, it was a ridiculous list of everybody, basically. So their suit was thrown out. In open court, the judge admonished their lawyer in open court. Usually that's done in chambers. And my suit won $50,000 apiece for 5 directors. Now, that's bad karma money. You don't touch bad karma money. You give that to the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund because somebody won't have a lawyer sometime. Now, I got a really good lawyer. He's a good friend, and he likes to have fun too. So, I've used him a few times. But that one pulled in a good chunk for Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund. But we stopped their project. Now, the same buoyancy thing it's a standard trick. Developers use it. More recently, and that's many years ago now, more recently in Vallejo, they had a plant that was going to import slag from metal production in Asia. Slag, toxic slag.
What is
grind it? When you make metal in a refinery, the stuff at the bottom after you boil off all the good metals, the crap that's left, that's slag. And it's toxic. It's got all the heavy metal stuff that you couldn't get out as a pure metal. And And they were going to bring that over to the United States by the shipload and pile it up and then grind it into cement. Now, doesn't that sound just lovely?
This is not
Grinding that just sounds dusty. Doesn't it sound dusty to you?
Yeah.
It sounded dusty to me too. And about 1,200 feet away is a grade school.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, that amount of dust, there's no way that project's ever going to make it. And they were turned down by the planning commission 6-1.
Wow.
But the developers got to the city council. Greece works really well, not just on machines, but political machines too. So they wanted to resurrect the project. So they basically told the developer that they were going to move from a temporary decision towards a final EIR. And they ordered the staff to go towards that final EIR. And I had just moved to Vallejo, and I thought it was dead, and now they're having it pop up. And so I go to the next city council meeting, and I'm not right in the head about this shit. I have to tell you, I have too much fun with it. I came up with the reasons that the plant all the documents weren't correct. And it had specific points like the buoyancy, and that's a technical issue. But the letters of everything that were there spelled out bullshit. And so I said that, they submitted this under penalty of perjury. I suggest that you actually file against them for the perjury, because what they gave you was bullshit. And I went down my list of items one at a time, which spelled out bullshit. And my list made it to the air district, which all the staff just found it to be the most hilarious thing they'd seen in a long time, But it also made it to the Attorney General's office in California. And if I'm saying that the document in front of the city council is actually a perjured document, maybe they should look at it. The city's ready to go on this project, but maybe it should be looked at. So they sent a 35-year experienced EIR specialist to look at it. They agreed it's bullshit. And that they sent a letter to the city that said the document you have in front of you cannot be used as the basis of a decision. The document is not a proper document. The document is fraudulent. Now, they didn't call it fraudulent because that begs litigation, but they basically said you can't use the document for a decision. And so the same trickery of floating things and other things too. They had a lot of stuff.
How did you get pulled into a lot of these things? Are you just like observing them from the outside, or have you been involved in communities where like people are coming to you? Like what brings you?
I live in a little tiny town of 3,200 people next door to a refinery. They dump 256 tons of waste on the town I'm living in. You think I'm not going to respond? So, first of all, that's not a neighborly thing to do. I've got neighbors. I don't throw my trash into your yard. Wouldn't that piss you off?
Yeah.
No, they just dumped 256 tons of trash on us. So it pissed me off.
Yeah.
And so, a couple of weeks later, there's a land use permit hearing I see on the docket for them to have a permit to continue to use the land that the refinery's on. And it's a routine thing. It's going to be renewed. The county makes money with the refinery operating, and they're going to, give them a use permit. But, I'm crazy enough. I went to the hearing myself. I pulled the little blue card and I hand it in. I get my 3 minutes of infamy. And I only used about 45 seconds. And I said, Your Honor, Commissioner Clark, I use gas in my car. I don't want to stop them from getting their land use permit, but they just dumped 256 tons of toxic waste on my town. I want you to hold their permit in abeyance until they come back with a good neighbor agreement. Short little bit, 45 seconds later, my 3 minutes is done, but I still have like time left. The lawyer for the refinery pipes up out of turn. He wasn't called on. There's no such thing as a good neighbor agreement in law. And Commissioner Clark is sitting up there. He's looking at his watch. His eyes are rolling. He's thinking, "You fucking kid, get out of my hearing. You're getting in the way of progress here, you know." But the head of the lawyer said there's no such thing, and so he turns to me and says, "Well, what is a good neighbor agreement?" And I said, "Well, there isn't any formal definition of a good neighbor agreement, but it's a common sense thing. And when two neighbors make an agreement how to behave better, it's a better neighbor. You know, if you don't dump your garbage over the fence," the analogy of the refinery, "I won't shoot your dog."
Mm-hmm.
The hearing came to a screeching halt. If you talk about shooting a dog, it doesn't go over very well. The governor of South Dakota found out that this is really not a very friendly sort of a thing to say. Well, Commissioner Clark's eyes, he went, shoot a dog. Well, it triggered the refinery manager somehow, and he yelled, "This is crazy. You can't hold up our permit for a good neighbor agreement. You don't have the right." And Commissioner Clark's nostrils flared. His pupils got big. Down came the gavel. Kaboom. Hearings are held in abeyance to come back with a good neighbor agreement.
Wow.
Here. The lawyers were going crazy over there, bumping into each other, the head of the refinery. They didn't know what the hell to do. And they come over to me and said, "The town you're in is an unincorporated township. There isn't a legal entity there to negotiate with." I said, "Negotiate with me." So they said, "Well, okay, 2 weeks from now." I said, "Well, I'm going to come with two people from the other town of Rodeo on the other side, because you dumped on them too, just mostly on us, a little bit on them. But I'll bring two from there and two from the town I'm in, and I'll see you in 2 weeks." So I actually went into their office with the other three people. We sat down and said, "We're not here to negotiate. We're just going to schedule a time for us to come in and talk about the scope of the things that we're going to negotiate about." And they had fired the head of the refinery because of his outburst, getting their land use permit in a sling. And they had a real smooth operator, a smooth talker to negotiate with us. And so I go home thinking things are going along about as well as could be handled. And I get a phone call, and it's a small town. Word gets around, and so people ask me, "We're in a meeting down at the city, hall here. Can you come down?" So I step in, and they're all sitting around a table, and they all look at me, and some of them with a little bit of a hostility in their grimace. And one of them says, "Were you negotiating on behalf of the town with the refinery?" I said, "Well, I just came from a meeting with them." And they said, "Well, what gives you the right to negotiate on behalf of the town?" I said, "Well, nothing does. Why don't you do the negotiation?" I turned and left. So they formed a committee and decided there wasn't anybody there that knew how to play poker with a refinery manager. So they brought me in as the negotiator. And that got, other than the $300 million that was a negotiated settlement for the release itself, the Good Neighbor Agreement was about an $80 million additional settlement, which included the design and construction of the world's first fence line monitor system, a state-of-the-art fence line monitor. They agreed. And there wasn't any such thing, but they agreed that we would have a 6-month design period to come up with what it was.
Wow.
During that 6 months, we designed a laser-based pollution detection system using ultraviolet and infrared lasers. If a chemical breaks the beam, you get a spectral fingerprint of the chemical. If you have a clean air beam that you've shot before, you can subtract that from the spectra you're looking at, and you know what chemical is in there that shouldn't be there. And if you know a chemistry spectra, now, this sounds amazingly like EEG, doesn't it? There's a waveform, and you decompose it into spectral peaks, and you have a library like a database. How would you ever imagine doing this? So anyway, the world's first infrared and ultraviolet laser pollution detection system was mandated for the refinery. They didn't want to build it, but they were forced to. The Good Neighbor Agreement had their land use permit. And when you have them by the land use permit, you got them, So they had no way around building it, and they built it.
Wow.
Now, the Air Quality Management District gets the ability to see the data, but their response was, "What are you, crazy? What are you using physics to detect chemistry for? We have a gas analyzer, okay. Well, let's use gas analyzer. Imagine the fence line system with a gas analyzer. You build a shed on the fence line with a hole in the wall you suck gas in the hole. If it hits that hole, you could detect it. I got a meter diameter beam that shoots a kilometer long. Anything that break the beam I caught. Whose system is going to catch stuff? You've got a little tiny hole, and I've got a gigantic freaking beam.
Right.
And, they couldn't argue that theirs was better in any way. And they were forced basically to build the system we wanted 30 years ago now.
Yeah.
Now, about 8 years ago, the Air District brought together the EPA, universities in California, USC, UCLA, Berkeley, all the advice, the Air Resources Board of the state. Everybody came to give advice to them about what's the best way to monitor emissions from a refinery. I was also invited. Also, Denny Larson has passed, unfortunately. He was a CDE person. And the system I came up with 30 years ago is declared the best system. So it was mandated in the Bay Area, and then right after that mandated for the whole state of California.
Wow.
So, but it's my avocation. So the design is in public domain. Nobody can patent it and live off the royalties of the design. It's my avocation. I do this for fun.
Yeah.
And somehow playing poker when you've got a pair of twos really is a fun game.
Yeah.
You have to be able to bluff, but you have to be able to bluff so realistically that they think you're not bluffing. So we operated the fence line system for about a year. And we had the data the air quality coming in and the air quality coming out. Well, I can subtract air quality from air quality, and I know how much has come out of them that they contributed. So I added up all of the shit that came out of them that went downstream and put it on a big stack of printout of a computer. And I asked the refinery manager if I could stop by for a meeting, and he said, "Oh, stop by for lunch." They know me by now. So I stopped in. I didn't accept the sandwich, but I set the printout on his desk, and I said, this printout shows everything that's come out of the refinery for the last year. Now, you haven't had a fire, you haven't had an accidental release. This is all just normal operation, but there's thousands of tons of toxicity coming out of the refinery. And I want you to change the valves that you're using from packing valves to a bellows valve. In your house, you've got a washless faucet, I bet. Remember the old faucets? You have to take them apart, put the rubber thing on the bottom and put them back together?
Yeah.
That's a packing valve. They're designed to eventually leak and have to be taken apart, fixed, and put back together. A bellows valve is a leakless valve. It's got a bellows with a pin that goes through a hole and it stops flow. And, they work really well. And when was the last time your faucet at home needed to have a faucet replaced because it was leaking? Oh man, those packing valves leak. Yeah. And the refinery has to have an employee with a little sniffer walking around. It's their job to go from valve to valve to valve and sniff them so they don't go above a certain number of parts per million. And if they do, then they have to flag it and they have to flange it off and take it apart and fix it and put it back together. So I'm telling him, I want you to switch every valve 2 inches and bigger in the refinery to a bellows valve. And he said, well, quite honestly, we haven't done anything wrong. And do you have any idea what it would cost? I said, yeah, about $10 million. They said, yeah, that's about right. I said, I know I know the pipe layout in your refinery. I know what it's going to cost, and it's about 10 million bucks. And he said, well, nobody could force us to do this because we haven't violated anything. And you're asking us to spend $10 million we don't have to spend. So, no, take your printout and get out. I said, okay, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my printout. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go to San Francisco, leave Cabraser, Hyman, and Bernstein. It's a class action lawsuit waiting to happen. And we're going to take this data and we're going to punch it into a dispersion model showing where it's going to go downwind. And that's going to create a class action of people that are exposed to your toxicity. And we're going to sue you for the long-term health consequence of your releases. So I'm going to tie you up in court for probably 5 years, depositions, interrogatories. Your engineers are going to be doing more of that than they are engineering. Do you want to run your refinery or do you want to spend time in court? You decide. He said, well, tell you what, leave the printout and I'll talk to the lawyers and I'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. I got a call the next day from a lawyer for the refinery. And he's hemming and hawing, just small talk, and lawyers don't really do small talk, I said, I bet you 10-1, you're calling to find out if I know somebody above the line in Leaf, Cabraser, Hyman, and Bernstein. Above the line is a partner in the law firm. Below the line, you're just, you're a lawyer on their staff, but you're above the line, you're somebody, And he said, well, yeah, sort of. I said, the way to find out is to say no. Fuck around and find out. And, that was the end of the conversation. I got a call to go back into the office to talk to the manager about a week after that. And I sat down with him and he said, talk to the lawyers. I said, yeah, I talked to a lawyer too. And he smiled, yeah, fuck around and find out. I heard it, So, he said, well, we looked at it and it's 10 million is a lot of money, but, valves fail. And when they fail, we have to fix them. Instead of fixing the valve, what about we replace them on a maintenance basis? Instead of all of them being replaced now, we replace them over time. And it would take a few years, but would replace them when they fail. And I'm sitting here with a pair of twos going, I know he's got his royal flush over there. He could tell me to get the fuck out of his office in a flash. But I said, yeah, that's reasonable. I said, okay, I'd agree to that. Yeah. When, there's no way in hell we can force them to do that. No, they agreed to do it. That's a really big thing, way beyond what just happened there, because it established a new best available control technology for refineries in California. Wow. No refinery could be forced to use a bellows valve until it was now best available control technology. And now when they have a valve that fails, they have to replace it with a bellows valve. Wow. So we calculated with another year after the 2 years, because they've been operating this freaking fence line for over 30 years now. We calculated after they fixed everything, a year's worth of good operation emissions, 700 tons a year less emission, 700 tons. And, you think, well, there's 700 tons in a year, that's 365 days in a year, a ton up in the air, it disperses all over. It's a very, very small impact on any individual. Yeah, well, you live downwind of the refinery then, so you stick your nose in their tailpipe and see what it's like, So anyway, I played poker with the refinery and had a good time doing that. Crockett, the little tiny town, had a cogeneration power plant proposed for it. Now, cogeneration, that's a really good idea. You're producing energy for the grid, and you're producing steam for some industry, and it's cooperatively using the resource of burning the fuel. It's a really good idea, but a good idea can be done badly,
Yeah.
And they were proposing this cogeneration plant across the street from the Victorian homes in town, right on the waterfront, the 20-foot tall corrugated metal building, stopping the view of the water of the Carquinez Straits and the hillsides on the other side, half a mile away. And I'm thinking, geez, that sucks. What else is bad? Well, we've got big cooling towers that are going to have a steam plume, and the steam plume is going to obscure the view for the people who aren't blocked by the 20-foot tall corrugated metal. They're going to be blocked by the steam plume coming off these multiple cooling towers. So we're going to obscure the view for the entire town. And I'm thinking, well, that really sucks. So we can't let them build this. And so in California, the California Energy Commission is there as a railroad commission. They're going to railroad over top of local zoning people building power plants. They want power plants. So they want to take the decision-making away from people that you can influence locally and hold them entirely at the California Energy Commission. Well, that's great. We're going to have to go up against the California Energy Commission on this. So we pulled the legal documents that formed the Energy Commission, and I read through. I knew their legal underpinnings better than they did, apparently, because when we went to the hearing where they submitted their documentation, they submitted what we had seen, and there's no cover letter saying that they're submitting under the penalty of perjury. It's a standard letter. It's a cover letter that said the founding documents say it shall have. It's not they could have, they might have, but they shall have an attestation under penalty of perjury as a cover. So without that, we raised my hand. I'm sorry, you can't accept that as submitted today because they didn't have this letter on the cover of it. And your legal documents that say how you operate say they shall have the document, not that they could, they shall. And they look at each other and they adjourn for about 10 minutes. They meet with their lawyer and they come back out and they said, yeah, you're right. They didn't submit it with a letter, and they can resubmit it next week. And who's next on the docket? And there were other power plants that were there ready to go.
Wow.
And they submitted, and when they came back afterwards, the projected need for power had been used up by the ones who had submitted. So they were no longer a base load power plant. They were dispatchable. You could turn it on and off when you needed them. And that's a whole different level of dirty. Power plants are dirty as you're turning them on and as you're turning them off. When they're running smooth, they're about as clean as they can get. So their modeling for being turned on in the morning and turned off at the end of the year didn't really fit the circumstance of being turned on and off and on and off. They had to redo all their computer modeling.
Wow.
And when they redid all their computer modeling, it turned out that it was not quite as clean as they thought it was at the beginning. It had a lot of nitrogen oxides. So I said, well, we'll use selective catalytic reduction. Well, in your smokestack, we're going to set a honeycomb of vanadium, and we're going to inject ammonia underneath that. And it's going to mix with the gas. The nitrogen oxide and the ammonia will be going through the catalyst, and they'll be destroyed, and nitrogen, pure nitrogen and oxygen are going to come out the other side. Well, we got rid of your nitrogen oxide problem, but we just gave you an ammonia problem. Well, we're going to put an ammonia tank with anhydrous ammonia, and so it's solved. Well, anhydrous ammonia if you release anhydrous ammonia, it forms a cloud at ground level. It's cold, it stays at the ground, and it's very toxic. It will kill people. And if the tank you have right next to the railroad track were to be hit by a derailed train, and it ruptured the tank, it would kill about 1,500 people. And they brought in a modeling guy, risk management guys. The likelihood of a train derailing on this turn during the life of the plant, and about the bazillion to one. And we basically said it's too large a risk to have 1,500 people downwind of that tank. Switch it to aqueous ammonia and bury the tank underground in a vault. Put polypropylene balls around it, so if it does leak ever, it minimizes surface area, and have a quench above it. They were forced to do it.
Wow.
Now, at one point, I lived in the town, and I got divorced, and my wife took that house, and I moved up to a house I had built up in the woods. So I left town for about 3 years, and I finally moved back to town. Had to ask my ex whether it was okay to move back to town. So I had a new lady friend, and it was okay. She didn't mind. So, and we moved back to town. The day we moved back to town, there was a train derailment on that curve.
Wow.
And it swept over top of the buried tank. The news the next morning didn't say 1,500 people didn't die last night because of this stupid kid doing this protesty thing years ago. But, there it was, that it was worth doing, because what we thought could have happened did happen. And if it would have been anhydrous ammonia and a ruptured tank, it was wintertime in the wind direction, it would have killed the 1,500 we were predicting. So, it worked out really well. Now, for 8.5 years, I stopped this plant from being built. They have a year statutory guarantee at the California Energy Commission. You submit your documents, a year from now, you'll get your decision. They withdrew their submission because of problems multiple times. The last time they came back, I did a Dun & Bradstreet on the new corporate entity that had bought them. It's now Pacific Generation. Who the hell is Pacific Generation? Pacific Corp. They own power generators from Washington State over to Montana down to Texas, everything but PG&E territory. They're a $10 billion a year profit company, not gross, but net profit. And so I'm thinking, we are fucking toast. They're going to squash us like a bug, And the head of Pacific Corp came to my house, and he met with me, and he said, what the hell's wrong with our plant? And I said, this and that, and the other thing. And he said, well, if we could make everything okay, would it be okay? I said, well, I'm only complaining when there's something wrong. If everything is okay, everything's okay. But why don't you send a bunch of engineers down, and we can actually talk engineering and how to build it and where to build it and all of that. So it starts out with 4 shafts, 2 steam turbines, 2 gas turbines on 4 shafts with little electrical generators on the shafts. It turns into one big freaking shaft with a giant steam turbine and gas turbine with a big electric turbine, the biggest GE Frame 7E turbine there is, the world's largest turbine. And it's moved from across the street from homes with a 20-foot tall wall to behind a bunch of tanks that are there already. You couldn't see it. And we designed it. They said, well, what do we have to do for noise attenuation? And I said, here's the sound contour of the hill. I had my son on my shoulders. I'd walked up and down the hills with a decibel meter and took readings all over that hillside. My little kid on my shoulders, tell him, be quiet for a minute. I got to take a reading. Okay, and write it down and move a few hundred feet over and do another one. So I had the whole hillside above it contoured as to what the background decibel levels were. I said, when you're done building it, there's no change in the sound levels. If they can hear you differentially from whatever's going on, is too loud. And you have to do more to sound attenuate it. So we didn't specify what technologies they needed to do to control the sound. We specified the outcome, the sound level that they had to meet, and they met it.
Nice.
So they ended up with a building that was moved away from where you could see it. It had a smokestack that wasn't any longer producing more nitrogen oxides than could be tolerated in the Bay Area.
Nice.
Their natural gas fuel is cleaner than oil, which was what the sugar refinery, which is going to receive the steam, had been using. So it's a good switch to natural gas. And they're going to make a whole bunch of electricity, which they proposed running on power lines overhead through the town. And I said, well, I want you to bury the power lines. And they said, well, no. So I went to the Energy Commission, and there's Swedish studies out showing 3 milligauss can cause cancer in kids, 400% increase in leukemia in kids. And 3 milligauss is not a hell of a lot of power. If you stand underneath an overhead power line with 115 kilovolts, you're going to pull probably 150, maybe somewhere in that range, not 3. So it's way above the Swedish standard, which is not a standard anywhere in the U.S. There's no standard in California at the time. So if you're standing above a buried power line, it's like 3 milligauss. So I'm in front of the Energy Commission, and the commissioners are all men, and they're all sitting behind their big dais, looking down at us, standing in front behind our little podium. And first of all, the power producer tried to get me thrown off as being inexpert. You don't know enough to comment, but being an EG tech, I know a lot about electrical currents and medical health hazards and things like that. And they couldn't get me deposed as inexpert. And so my testimony holds as my testimony, and it has to be held in equivalent standard with the rest of them. And so I present the 3 milligauss standard in Sweden, and overhead lines at about 150, and buried lines are reasonably okay. And the commissioners say, well, there's no standard in California. And what would you propose as the standard? Don't ask me for something like that. I got a microphone, this is not going to go well. So I say, well, I propose that the standard is that the Gauss meter is held at testicular height, standing above the deal, and it'd be 3 milligauss at testicular height. And you can see them all kind of like, don't twist the noogies, but they all decided that was going to be the standard at 3 feet. I think they all thought their legs were a little longer than they really are, But 3 milligauss at 3 feet is the standard because of that hearing. And anyway, but you can see, I'm having too much fun with all of this. It's just.
That does bring me to a question that I wanted to ask that you were mentioning.
I'm a devout hedonist.
Yeah, you had mentioned like being a devout hedonist. Like where and when did you get that title, or like why do you choose that title or that path in a sense?
Well, first of all, devout and hedonism don't really go together very easily. You go, so something sounded wrong there, but this is the truth. I'm led by things that I enjoy, and I'm a spoiled kid. I've always done what I felt like doing. I was in the honors program. I could get out of doing any class I wanted to. I didn't have to take phys ed, but I'm a swimmer. I wanted to go, swimming. So I could, I signed up for whatever I signed up for. I never went through registration. I hate to stand in lines. So I never went through registration at the university. I went and I stood outside the building. I say, they stand in line, which I don't want to do, and they go inside the building. So I looked inside the building. Now, once they're inside the building, they stand in line at each of these tables to get a card, a computer punch card. This is how long ago it was, for each of the classes they were going to be in. And then they took the punch card that they got, and they went over to the advisors over here, and they went to an advisor who would then look at what they selected and sign an advisor card, and they would wrap them all up and put them in a box, and then it went to the computer center. Well, skip those lines and go to the computer center.
Mm.
So I just went to the computer center, struck up a friendship with the guys at the computer center, and they'd be happy to register me for any class I wanted. But when I wanted to sign my own advisor card, they were a little leery. So I said, well, who goes and looks at them after you're done with them? Well, we box them up. We send them to a warehouse. I don't think they're ever looked at ever again. So they said, oh, go ahead. So I signed on my handwriting is on my advisor card. And so I was self-advised and I took way more classes than I should have. You know, there's a limit of how many you're supposed to take without a specific signature from your advisor. So anyway, I took way more courses than I should have, and spring semester came and I didn't want to go to school at all. So I dropped down to a minimum number of courses, and I only went to class when I heard there was a test. So I still ended up with just shy of a 4.0.
Wow.
So,
and if I remember correctly, you studied, I know world religions, right? You had two majors,
yeah,
religions, and then, was EEG was the other one, or what was the
physiological psychology and also philosophy and world religions.
So with
I started out, my first shot was pre-med at University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. And I ran out of courses I wanted to take there. And I transferred to North Dakota State University, go Bison, you know.
Yeah.
There I took world religions and philosophy from Dr. Roach, whose voice was like Everett Dirksen. You probably don't know who he is, but he has the voice of freaking God. And he didn't need a microphone. He didn't need a sound system. His voice filled whatever room he was in. And it came down from on high, from angles in the room you didn't even know were there. And people would go to sign up for his classes just to hear him. Anyway, he officiated my first wedding.
That's cool.
And I got married my last time, my sixth partner here. So
wow. I heard you mention in one of the episodes that you did that you identify like as a philosophical Taoist. Is that accurate? Can you just explain like what is philosophical Taoism and
well,
why?
Daoism has kind of plain Daoism, which is not it's not as pure thought level. There a lot of ritual stuff. And I'm not big on rituals, you know, but the philosophy of equality of opposites. I mean, how would we know white if we didn't know black? How do we know black if we didn't know white? They form each other by opposition. And the yin yang symbol, the golden circle with the black and white yin yang in the middle of it, isn't just for the Northern Pacific Railroad, you know, that Daoism's sign basically. But that it's got a lot of deep philosophical aspects to their belief system. And I find those all to be really quite enticing. So I kind of identified with that. A lot of the other world religions are ritual stuff. And as I said, I'm not really big on rituals. So.
What was it about the deeper philosophies in there that were really resonant with you that seemed to kind of guide your life in different ways?
Well, have you ever done psilocybin?
I have, yeah.
Okay. Well, you know how things kind of flow?
Yeah.
The yin yang really makes really particularly good sense in certain states. And, you know, the equality of opposites becomes obvious when you're looking at it in the right state. if you're not in the right state, you look at it and go, well, black and that's white, they're not the same. They're opposite. There's no equality there. They're opposites. So, but given the right circumstance, the conceptually altering your awareness of what things are, you can kind of see a deeper level. And the Taoist philosophies are that. Lao Tzu was the author of and that's really great stuff. The Tao Te Ching,
Yeah.
It's a fabulous set of philosophies. So thank God the guard stopped him at the gate and wouldn't let him go till he wrote it. So the story goes. So,
Yeah. I had like two other I feel like you'd enjoy these questions, and I think they're two of your passions that they're connected to, and one of them are with EEG and then one of them with environment. And what I was kind of wondering about is if like somebody were to come with you and say like, hey, I've got $1 billion to invest or fund something, whether it's research or technology within like EEG or within neurofeedback, where would you want to direct that money towards?
Well, at this point, I've guided a few companies that have asked for my advice, and they've always offered things for my advice. And I've always said, well, if you pay me, how could you trust my advice? So, and their money men are looking at me like, what? You're turning down a % share of a company that's going to make big money later, don't dangle money in front of me. I grew up in a family that had money, and it's used as a carrot, but it's used as a stick too. So if you dangle money in front of me, I'm wondering, what are you trying to make me step in? I view it as a warning if people dangle funds. Now, I've been happy to give them my bad advice for free. And some of them have taken my bad advice to good effect. For a long time, I've talked about wavelet analysis as a superior way to decompose the EEG into its component frequencies instead of the Fourier.
What's a wavelet?
See this?
Yeah.
That's a Morlet wavelet. That's a 5. A wavelet is a template, a frequency template. And if the frequency that's being generated passes by the wavelet and it's resonant, and if it has the same frequency content, you're going to get an output.
So wavelet is like a series of waves together.
A whole series of a series of these templates, one for every frequency you want to be interested in.
Okay.
And at that point, when it responds, that frequency is present. Now, the Fourier senses everything's a sine wave. Well, if you've looked at EEG for very long, you've seen a lot of waves that weren't sinusoidal. And if it's a monomorphic wave, it's got a point on it, like mu does. And if the 10 hertz mu, the Fourier will say there's a 10 hertz and a 20. There's no 20 there. It's a point. It's not a 20 hertz rhythm. It's a point on a 10 hertz wave, you idiot. It's non-sinusoidal. Your assumption was violated, and you fixed the violation by creating harmonics, which fool me now. You're showing me false signals in the Fourier outcome from monomorphic waves and non-sinusoidal waves. And it assumes the wave started at the beginning of time and goes on to eternity. Now, I'm not that old. I won't last that long. So, give me something that can happen in discrete on and off periods, not something that has to be continuous. And have something that can actually respond to a transient without ruining everything. And have something that allows for a state change. Wake, drowsy, sleep, are all state changes. Have you ever seen anybody's EEG hold a stable state? If you think you have, you don't know what you've been looking at. People, you go up and down in your level of vigilance constantly. The vigilance model has an algorithm that goes second by second by second, will tell you how vigilant you are quite accurately in eyes closed data. So all the assumptions of the Fourier are violated by the EEG. And everybody uses Fourier. And Fourier, first of all, you can't use Fourier for feedback. It's got a window, a time window, and you have to fill that window in order to have an output. So if it's a 4-second window, it takes it 4 seconds to respond. Wow, we'll just make it a shorter window. Well, you have less resolution. The full wave has to exist within the window. So if it's 1 second long, you can go to 1 hertz, but nothing below. So, the Fourier is inherently flawed in its mechanisms and its assumptions. Now, wavelet analysis doesn't care if you come and go. It doesn't care what state you're in. It doesn't care if you're sinusoidal. Whatever. If you're a wave on by. We'll tell you where you're resonant and what frequency content is present. So, as an example, Sense AI is a home general health and wellness device. They listened to me suggest wavelets, and their engineer said, "Nobody is doing wavelets. Why should we?" I said, "Well, it's a better method." The Fourier and we'll just do digital filtering like everybody does. Well, you could do like everybody does, but you're going to get like everybody does. So if you use digital filters like an FIR filter, FIR filters are a little slow, but they're very precise. But they're slow. It takes a few waves to get through, and a higher order filter takes a few more waves to get through. So it might not respond for half a second to a second, and that's a little slow. You have to respond within 350 milliseconds in order to assume that feedback is going to be reasonably accurate. If you go beyond a half a second, you start to decouple from it phenomenally. And operant people show if you delay the feedback by more than half a second, your ability to actually influence the behavior start to fall apart really fast. So, FIR filters are a little slow. They're really accurate, but most feedback systems use them. Some go IIR filters, which are instantaneous. They look at a little piece of a slope. They say, if this slope kept going, we'd have this wave.
Wow.
Well, that's kind of a good assumption. That they're very quick, but they're not very accurate.
Right.
Their filter that says 8 to 12 might respond from 4 to 20. Mostly somewhere around the 8 to 12, but they respond way outside their spec. So IIR filters are very quick. They're virtually instantaneous, but they're not accurate. So wavelets are fast. They're accurate. They don't have the assumption of the Fourier. It's a better fit to the EEG. And so their engineer said, "Well, okay, I'll do one and try it." Well, I see you need a whole bank of them, a bunch of filters next to each other, and try it. And he came back a few weeks later and said, "Hey, this works really slick." So hey, you got my bad advice for free.
So that's where
and the Koreans got my bad advice to keep the male and female data separately. And it's going to take you twice. If you listen to my advice, it's going to take you twice as long to make your database. It's going to be twice as hard. And I can't guarantee that anybody's going to give a shit, So, but I can look at the male and female brains on the average and tell that they're different. And, I can't see the difference in their EEG myself.
Right.
But I hypothesize that there's differences that we won't know until we actually have a large collection that can actually look at it.
No. Yeah, I heard you in another pod. And I think that's really important, right? Because if there is a distinguisher, then we want to be aware of those, or even if it's
dramatic differences.
Right. And even if it's knowing where, like, I heard you talk about, like, you could be a female but have a more male type brain even as a female. And so, but even knowing that uniqueness of that brain, not necessarily being worse or better, but like what makes you unique and who you are and how you are going to perform at your best. Like, that's really key to understand that, right?
But during the developmental years, if you hang out with young kids going through their developmental years, you see males and females hit their developmental surges at different points in time.
Right.
And if you've got one group surging and the other one not, and then the other one surging, the other one not, you got two lines that are out of phase. To combine those two lines that are out of phase, what do you get? Something you don't want to be compared to. So it's neither male nor female. It's some damn unique database. And 45 years old on up, females light up with fast electrical activity. Beta and gamma light up big. Males go a little quiet. You kind of silent at the high frequencies, eerily so. And if you got one with a whole bunch and one with none or very little, and you're going to be compared, which one do you want to be compared to? Because you don't want to be compared to the average. If you're a female, you're going to look like you got too much beta. If you're a male, you're going to look like you don't have enough. But in reality, you could be exactly fine for your sex.
Wow.
And until you gather that data together in a large enough amount, you can't really judge it. Previously, they had the normative data, male and female, and they look at a female and they look kind of like the males, but they didn't have a large enough group to actually make a statement. So when you gather it all together, it does make a difference. And the Koreans proved it with their data set. And after that, the Swiss-Russian database gathered more people into it, and they split their male and female separately now.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, when you've been shown that they're not the same, isn't it time to split them? So that not everybody has, but it's expensive to do that. I mean, the cheapest database I've ever heard of was the Swiss-Russian database. It cost about $1 million for 1,000 people.
Still, that almost seems like it's like, I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's like $1 million for 1,000 people, but it also seems like the investment to understand that kind of information would be so beyond worth it. Like,
yeah,
I guess it's one of the things
that's why the Koreans got a grant from their government to create a Korean normative population database. And
So-
they were paid 2 5-year grants, and they weren't small. So we're not talking $1 million. We're talking lots of millions. But it was worth it. They have a product now that is extremely valuable, and they have parts of what they collected that they haven't even executed yet. All the ERPs and all the genetic testing. They haven't executed all the stuff that they've got. But they're not just a little mom and pop operation. Last I knew, they had 50-something employees and 50-60 million dollars in the bank, and the people that go to the CES meetings, the electrical device meetings,
consumer electronics.
You see Siemens sniffing around them. You see the Google sniffing around them. That there are large corporate entities that are looking at the Korean database group eagerly waiting for them to do their IPO. And it'll probably be all snatched up with institutional investors pretty much.
Yeah.
So
there's so many questions. I feel like I could talk to you forever, Jay. You're an unending vault of knowledge. And
yeah, I'm so full of it comes out my mouth.
It's great. Honestly, it was one of the hardest things in preparing for this podcast, because I would watch an episode and feel like I could go down this rabbit hole with you for several hours, or this rabbit hole for several hours, and like you have so much insight. One of the questions that I always end my show with is just like, what's a question that you would ask the audience, one that might like shift their perspective or have them consider something in a different way?
Well, I think I would ask the audience to try to give up their preconceptions of what they're looking for when they're looking at EEG. The EEG, you've got a lot of channels of data, and somewhere in that data is the finding, and you've got to be able to see it. If you have a preconceived idea of where it is, you'll be looking there. You may not see where it happens. So very much like our ideas sculpt what we perceive, EEG interpretation is sculpted a lot by what you think might be there. I prefer reading EEGs with only the age known to me, because I don't want to think, oh, that's a XYZ, it's over here, because I won't be looking over here, and I will miss something. I would rather go in blinded, not totally blind, but blinded to medical history and complaints, and just look at the EEG. And for years now, my lectures have been, I'll walk in, people hand me EEGs I've never seen before, tell me the age. I go through the raw EEG and tell people what I see, do some simple spectral processing. I don't use normative databases at all. And I basically tell them what the patient looks like clinically. And when I'm done, I say, okay, somebody's in the audience here. This is your patient. Tell me, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? What did I miss? And without exception, they just say, my God, you just told me exactly about the patient. So
Wow.
a good friend of mine was trying to get into a university in South Africa to show them neurofeedback and QEEG stuff for over a decade. And finally, Rusty Turner, Robert Turner, the neurologist, epileptologist, child neurologist in South Carolina, he took a lecture from me and took a sabbatical for a year and learned about neurofeedback in the US. He was going over to visit his school chums over in South Africa at this university. Now, Gerard Finnemore is very, very good at EEG, QEG, and neurofeedback, and he's in South Africa, and he's been trying to get in for a decade. And he gets to the reception desk, and they throw away his stuff and just tell him to get out, so he's not getting in. Rusty's going for a visit. The head of psychiatry and the head of neurology are his two chums. So he calls me and says, anybody in South Africa that can do an EEG while I'm there? I said, well, Gerard, So I called Gerard and tell him, Dr. Rusty needs you to do a recording. And he calls me back a little later and says, I've been trying to get into that university for so long. The medical center, they just throw me out, so now I get to go do recordings for him. Thank you. So he went in, did 3 recordings live in front of them. They're brief. It takes, 20, 30 minutes to do recording. You do one after another. And then they sent them to me, and live with nothing but the age, I told them what the patients were like. At the end of that, I don't know whether it was the head of psychiatry or neurology, said, well, one of those was my daughter. And I've had people studying her for years now, trying to figure out what's going on. And you just told me more about her, and without knowing anything about her, than any of these people that could examine her, hands-on, face-to-face, just looking at her EEG. You've given me more information than I could have possibly gotten from any of the experts that we have. So they were blown away by what we see every day in the field. And so Gerard, who couldn't get in, is now told, well, you can't just leave. We have to set up a department. And I don't know whether it's going to be psychiatry or neurology, but we're going to have techs. We're going to have to buy equipment. You have to advise us on what to get. So from not being able to get in, now he can't get out. So, but it was fully accepted based on the face validity. Now, what's face validity? Well, when it hits you in the face, anyway,
Great.
And my favorite kind of review of the EEG and everything, at the end, your conclusion of what the patient is like ends up being again and again and again and again correct.
Wow.
And, ultimately, if you really have faith in the EEG and you know what you're looking at, you have to call it out. And I'm afraid there's some people that don't want me to see their EEGs. So, because you do see things, and it's not always flattery.
Yeah.
And I don't have the common courtesy to pull a punch. So if I see something, I'm going to call it.
Yeah. Is that like you're seeing like like sociopathy or those kinds of things, or like a lack of
Yeah,
intelligence, or combination of the two? Or
yeah, a little bit of all of that. I mean, you can spot the Achilles heel. Now, I
Mm,
I was hired by a company that screens Fortune 500 finalists, CEO finalists,
mm,
and the CEO of that company brought me in, and we recorded his EEG. And a couple weeks later, I went back with the results to show him the results, and kind of show him what the EEG QEG could show.
hmm
And he's the CEO of the company, and I tell him, "Well, you're not the brightest bulb in the pack, and your memory is, terrible, and you've got depression, and you,
mm,
you're probably obsessive, but with your EG alpha this slow, uh, you're having cognitive decline."
mm.
And, well, that's a way to get a customer, isn't it? Your brand is shit. Now sign here as my next customer. Um, so, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, it's that's the most accurate read of me that I've ever had." And most people tell me that
Mm,
things look fine. And out of his drawer, he pulls a big 32 channel EEG. They're not just a small little
yeah.
strip. They're about this thick, and they're big, a large format on paper EEG, and had a little sticker, and he flipped it open, and it says meditation up at the top. Duh. Uh, he says, "Well, what do you think of this?" And I looked at it carefully, and I said, "Well, if it's meditation, it's a style I've never seen." And he said, "Well, I just told him I was meditating."
Mhm.
I don't know how to meditate, but they told me I look like an excellent meditator. Uh, anyway, you
Mhm.
know, people tell people what they think they want to hear if they think they're going to get somebody to sign on the dotted line. And I wasn't there for that. I just, that's an honest show of our trade. And, um, he thought it was great.
Mm,
Uh, his marketing people said it's too much like a lie detector test. We're not, our clients are going to balk at it. We have to have them come to us. If it looks, too much like a lie detector test of some sort, they're not going to come. And
yeah.
anyway, his marketing people turned it down, but the head of the company thought it was great.
Wow.
So,
Well, Jay, this has been absolutely fantastic. I do have to wrap it up, unfortunately. Is there anything that
well,
you
you're
want?
getting me warmed up.
We'll have to do around 2 or 3 or 4 then at some point. But anything that you want to plug or send somebody to, or an environmental cause you want people to be aware of as we wrap things up?
Um, you know, there's a lot of people right now that are looking at carbon capture and sequestration,
Mm,
where they take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the ground.
mm,
And I have to say that it's a fraudulent um, uh, dodge. It's not a real thing. It takes more energy to do it than it saves in things. There are people trying to directly capture it out of the air, and the efficiency of the best they can do right now isn't efficient enough to actually make any difference at all.
mm,
Right now, there's a proposal in the San Francisco Bay Area to run a big pipeline all the way around the Bay Area from Antioch in the Delta all the way through to Richmond and back out to pick up all the refineries and all the heavy industries, smokestack effluent,
mm,
and put that into a compressed gas, carbon dioxide compressed into essentially almost a liquid.
mm.
And it's really, really, really concentrated. And then run that through and pump it underground to sequester it. Oh, where's it go once you pump it underground?
Yeah.
Well, they show in their modeling that some of the fault lines going up towards the town I live in are going to have some of it go that way. And there's a bunch of question marks going back the other way towards Antioch on the other side of the water. They don't have any idea. They really have no idea where it's going to go. Now, is it safe? No, it's not. Well, it's just carbon dioxide. What the hell? Well, try breathing it as pure carbon dioxide and see how long you get.
Right.
There's been a few ruptures that's killed thousands of cows and lots of people. And, the firemen see a car that's pulled off to the side of the road. If they go to try and save the people in the car, they have to have their own breathing apparatus because the carbon dioxide there where the people are passed out in their car isn't enough to support life for you going there to rescue them. So it's released as a gas. Well, it's just going to go up in the air. It just goes up in the air, right? No, it comes out cold. It hugs the ground. It forms a moisture cloud of coldness. So it's going to look like a cloud hugging the ground, and it will kill anything that gets in it. Now, the plants will love it. The plants will green right up from all the CO2. But all the little rodents, all the birds, all the beasts, anybody driving through, it'll kill you.
Wow.
So it's not safe, and it's not really environmental. Who's behind it? Well, the people that are putting out the carbon dioxide. This is a nut and pea shell game to make you think it can go away. It can't. And they're getting billions of dollars from the federal government to go forward on these projects, and they're environmentally not there. There's no fundamental savings, and the more you look at it, the worse it looks. So carbon capture and sequestration, CCS, is a sham. It's a nut and pea shell game, and the public is just going to lose the billions of dollars. It's not going to get rid of the carbon dioxide.
I mean, if somebody wanted to take action to help stop that, or if there's anything that anyone can do, is there now?
Well, if you punch in CCS and environmental groups pop up, there's a lot of people fighting against it. There's some organized groups. I'm not well enough to leave the house anymore. Really, if you see me, I'm in this chair pretty much. So, I do have to get up. Nature does call, but I can't get out to meetings. I have a cerebrospinal fluid leak out my nose. If I catch a cold, it goes into my brain. So it's not safe for me to be out, and it's not safe for me to be in either. But but I stay happy, and life is good. I'm keeping it going as long as I can, as long as there's the next thing to be happy about. And I always plan a birthday party for myself to keep myself going to the next year. And Lee Steinberg, Lee Steinberg, the sports agent, Jerry Maguire movie was made about him. He's one of the speakers at the Sassoon Summit, the little birthday gathering. It's a way to raise money to give away to students, and he's going to pop in with his story. And Silvana from Macedonia is coming over. Santiago from Singapore is going to pop over. We've got people from around the world popping in here to this little town of 29,000 people. We take over the yacht club for 3 days and party. And there's speaker after speaker with a little gap, 15, 20-minute gap in between speakers, so you don't step on the next speaker. But a lot of good science is going to be discussed, and good times are going to be had. So that's a way to get myself incentivized to try and make it to the next year.
I love it. I love that. I'll have to make sure I always set myself a birthday party. Try to make them as grand as yours one day.
Well, the Sassoon Summit ends up being just a crazy idea to take care of. And you see this hanging under the chin?
Yeah.
I've had this shaved off over the years. I donate the proceeds of the auction for the rights to shave the beard to student funds. And over the years, $24,625 have been raised.
Wow.
It's a little $2,000 here or there. 7,000 was the biggest one at an APB meeting. But I had two groups, bidding against each other.
Yeah.
And the way it works, it's kind of like if you ante up in poker, you don't get to take your money back when you lose. It's all in the pot. So anybody who bid anything ended up putting it in, and the losing side just didn't get to do the shave. And so this is probably going to get lost again. I didn't shave it this last year because you got to have enough to actually make it worth something for somebody.
Yeah.
So
No, I'm
so we'll probably get this shaved off this year. And I hate to shave, so you got to do it every once in a while.
once a year sounds like a good plan to me.
Oh, once every few years. I don't
Few
shave
years.
every year.
Fair enough.
So,
Right.
but I tell you, I was in Australia, and I told them that I was there, and it was their fundraiser for their students, and that my fees that they were going to pay me were $2,000 Australian, and it's, I don't want to be paid, for God's sake. So I told them I'm going to put this money in to keep my beard. And if you guys can raise more money than this, somebody gets the right to shave it. So they raised another few thousand, enough to top my two, and they shaved it off. And I thought that was crazy enough, but they pasted the beard onto the foam wig heads that they measure for electrode placements.
Yeah.
Well, they pasted it on one of those. The next year, they auctioned that off, and I can't think of anything rattier than a wig head with this curly beard hairs glued on it. Oh my God, burn it! They sold it for $500. So, no accounting for taste, obviously. So, anyway, life is too much fun to pass up, so I'm still doing it, and this October looks too fun to pass up, so I'm going to make it to October if I can, and we'll figure out what I can do to make it past then later.
Great.
So,
love it. Well, Jay, this has been, again, just a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate all your time, and we'll have to talk again soon.
Well, enjoy your day best you can. And if you figure out a way to have more fun, let me know.
We'll do. Absolutely.